Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a dermatologist all the way from North Carolina in the United States. His name is Dr. Jeffrey Scales, aka Dr. Clearskin. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me today.
Oh no, thank you. I appreciate you're a very busy man, and that was something that sort of caught me by surprise because I'll be honest, I saw the name and I was like, what is this a gimmick thing? And as soon as I went on your page, I was like, oh, okay, this is clever. No, this is a good marketing trick in a sense. Like it is good business and you're clearly like a serious professional, but there's also like, you're getting into that social media game, which I think is clever because it drives more business, you know?
It's funny that I've had patients ask me if I had changed my name. I literally changed my name. I grew up with Scales. There's a strong family of Scales in the Richmond, Virginia area. And, I never thought of it as being something that matched with the field I chose. It wasn't until I was training that someone said, hey, your name is Scales. It goes with dermatology. I'm like, wow, I never noticed that, It was really funny. Someone says I was destined to be a dermatologist. But yeah, I think it works really nicely. It really does. It's kind of fun.
Wow. Well, how did that moniker come though? Like, did you just pick that off the spot, or is there like a story behind that, or what's the deal with that?
Sure. So the Dr. Clearskin happened to be a name that was given to me by one of my employees. This lovely woman that worked with me over the years, and I used to call her my work daughter because she would attend to me and she, make sure my tie is straight in the morning and these sorts of things. And she's a very creative lady. And she said to me one day, you're really good at helping with skin. You're Dr. Clearskin. I thought, oh, that's pretty funny. And she kept repeating it. And I said, I think I'll borrow that. And I think I'll use it. And it's been very popular. I really like the name. And we've come up with a line of products, which just happen to have the name on them too. And I think it's been really successful. I look forward to seeing where it goes with this.
From like a business standpoint, because I sort of mentioned it briefly in the preamble there, but like, did it actually, from that point onwards, did you see sort of a shift in interest towards your brand? Like, were people starting to message you more and be like, oh, what's this all about? And then, so you're getting like an increase in sales or something like that?
Sure, it's relatively new. I really just formed a company and a trademark in October of this year. But The name Scales also seems to catch a lot of people's attention as well. That, they honestly think I may have changed my name to either one of those when it was something else. But it seems to match with skin. And we've been open for, nearly 25 going on 26 years. So we have a reasonable following here. And I think the Dr. Clearskin part is helping us to take the business in a slightly different direction. We focus primarily on taking care of people with sick skin. And so that's been great. But now we're focusing even more so on the cosmetic demands that people have for looking better and for having less hair and look younger. Those are things that are very much in demand right now. So this, aligns with some of the new things that we're trying to do.
Excellent. And one of the things I noticed in particular is that you're kind of focused on the Black community. Is that right? Like, you're more targeted to that, or is it just for everyone? And what's the deal there?
It's that we're focused on the full range of the population. I will tell you that medicine in the United States has a history of being a rather discriminatory type of industry. And if you go back and look at some of the data associated with OBGYN, many of OBGYN and other fields, many of the original experiments were done on people of color and done without anesthesia and done using slaves and people who were owned. And medicine has a history in the United States of being very exclusive for certain people. Part of what we try to do is to make sure that it's an open avenue for everyone. I don't specifically seek to say that I'm a skin doctor that takes care of Black skin only. I think that would be nonsensical. Or it makes no more sense to someone say I'm going to take care of white patients only.
Of course, yeah, no.
Right, I wouldn't. But in practice, dermatology is a field that's been one of the least visited by people of color over the history. And some of it has to do with how it's practiced. If you were to go to a typical textbook and look at all the pictures, you would think that only fair-skinned people got skin diseases. And that's not the case. So there is a movement now in this field and as well as other fields to try to equalize some of the inequities that have been around for many, many years. So I'd like to consider myself a person that's willing to see everyone and anyone. Different age ranges. Previously, I was a pediatrician. I see a disproportionate number of children. I like working with children. I just think I'm trying to make an environment that's welcoming to everyone.
Excellent. And well, talk us through your journey of actually getting into dermatology. So from the beginning, because you mentioned before that, some people had said to you like, oh, he's destined for this. So obviously there was obviously like an acute kind of interest from a young age or something like that. You said like it comes from family as well. So talk to us a little bit about your journey in the beginning days of getting into dermatology to sort of where you are today.
I was raised in the Washington, D.C. area, and I had the good fortune of being a child of a woman who was a nurse, an RN, and she worked at Howard University. And physicians were always held in great esteem in our household. Medicine in general was considered a very admirable calling. In some ways, I think of it as almost the family calling. While my father would work for the government, my mother was very much involved with medicine. And I initially went to medical school with the idea that I was going to be a person that practiced primarily with adults and with chronic diseases like diabetes and high blood pressure. But after getting there, I really took a great liking to pediatrics. I liked taking care of kids. I thought it was very fun. And I spent a number of years training and practicing pediatrics. But one of the things I noticed was that there's at least 10% of the visits I was having were associated with the skin. And I felt like my training for diseases of the skin was inadequate for what I was trying to do. Meanwhile, if you were trying to get someone in to see a skin doctor, it's a very limited field in terms of opportunities to get an appointment. The waiting list for an average dermatologist can be up to 3 months or longer. Wow. So I, at some point, got frustrated and decided I was going to go and I was going to train in dermatology if I were able to be accepted. And I was accepted to a number of programs. And I went to a place here called Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is, you probably recognize those names, Winston and Salem. Obviously, you've probably heard those are cigarette brands, but it's a really nice city. And I trained in dermatology and had a very good fortune of training with some very good people. There's Dr. Urizzo and some, Dr. McMichael and some other people trained me. And I walked away really feeling very much that this was the field for me. I've always had a great sense of visualization. In dermatology, you've got to be able to look at things and have a good memory for something. You may see it once every 2 or 3 years, but there should be some recollection on your part to be able to say, this is that disease or that disease. And I felt like I was very comfortable in doing that. And so it has been a really great field for me. And I have really seen some amazing things over the years. And I think it's the best field in medicine.
What would you say are some of your biggest success cases in the field of dermatology?
It's a great question. I think that it can be measured in a couple ways. Number one is that how do I feel about how successful the outcome was? And then there's how does the patient feel about how successful the outcome was? You find that they're not always the same thing. But I think some of my best stories I have to tell are picking up unusual cancers in skin with patients who don't fit the typical skin cancer patient. Most patients that have skin cancer are generally fair skin. They have spent too much time in the sun. They have weathered skin, and you can look at them and tell that perhaps they might be high risk. But there are people who get unusual types of skin cancer. One in particular that comes to mind is called Mycosis Fungoides. And that is a type of skin cancer where it's really immune cells, they happen to go up into the skin and then they start to present. And it's hard sometimes to make the diagnosis, but we've been able to make it in particularly darker people when at times it was passed off for something else. And I've been very pleased that we were able to help in those circumstances. Generally, it takes about 5 years to diagnose this cancer, even if you see the rash. So we were able to do it much quicker than that. And I think it helped with some of the outcome of some of these patients. And the other thing from another standpoint, some of the successful cases, I know acne is a really common type problem, but when you watch a person whose self-esteem is really tied up with their skin, and they're at 16, 18, 20 years of age, 22, and they're very self-conscious to begin with, and they start off with a really difficult circumstance with their acne, and then you see them transform over the course of months. I use this medication called isotretinoin or Accutane, and it's a great medicine. A lot of doctors use it, but it is amazing. It's transformative. You see people's general happiness improve. They start to wear makeup and they start wearing jewelry and dressing better as the months progress because they're feeling that much better about themselves. That is almost magical to watch, to see a person come out of a level of perhaps depression that really allows them to become the full person that they are, to give them some confidence. So I like that probably as much as anything I did.
Amazing. Truly. I mean, yeah, I can see how rewarding it would be. I mean, in any field in medicine, being a doctor in general is going to be rewarding because it's, you're helping people at the end of the day. But particularly with this, like, where you can sort of measure the results over time. And as you outlined there, you're seeing a person almost come to life again, in a manner of speaking, which is incredible. Why is your work in dermatology so important to you? I mean, you've already outlined a few reasons, but like, if you had to kind of just break it down, like, what does it mean to you, your body of work and what you do?
It's an excellent point. It helps segue into another topic, which I highlight in my office. I highlight on my website. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think that access to medicine and to health and to treatment has been skewed in many different ways based on societal issues. It can be an issue of income.
Right.
People who have a great deal of income have access to things that many people don't. It can be an issue of geographics. If I live in the middle of the country in some little town and I have some disease, I might go to the local hospital, but it does not mean that necessarily you're going to get the best treatment there. Perhaps it's a place that's not as comfortable as other places. I give the example, it's a personal example of not necessarily a great story, but about 2 years ago, I had some chest pain. And I am considered if you talk to any of my friends and talk to anyone who knows me, they will tell you they think I'm probably one of the healthiest people they know. I eat reasonably well. I run. I've been to several half marathons, and I had just been out doing wind sprints just literally 3 weeks before this happened. And I ignored it. And at some point, it bothered me so much, and I had access to high-tech medicine that took care of me and literally saved my life in a matter of hours. Had I been out in the middle of somewhere else and this had happened, or someplace where they're not as comfortable working with people with heart disease, I would have been in trouble. I ended up having a minor heart attack. I recovered completely from it, and I got a stent, and I go on with my life. I'm out running and back to where I was before. But geographics plays a lot. But the third thing that I mentioned is socioeconomics. When you think about it, poor people often will have difficulty accessing things that they might need. There are healthcare programs that are put in place for poor people. And the one that we talk about in the United States and from state to state is called Medicaid. And it's for poor children, and for women who are pregnant and people who may be disabled. If you were to go to an average city and find out how many dermatologists accept that particular healthcare program, you'll find it's, far less than 10%. Part of it has to do with the administrative burden that comes with it. Part of it has to do with the fact that some people are not necessarily interested in serving that particular population. So part of what I really like about my work is I feel like I call myself in some ways balancing the scales. No pun intended. That I am attempting to open up access to people that don't necessarily have access, and give them a chance to have things that they might need. It's amazing to me sometimes how far people are willing to travel to just have an appointment with me or people like myself, because there's no access where they are. They're somewhere in their itching a lot, having bad acne, and they can't find anyone that's willing to accept their insurance nearby, or there just may not be a doctor that's able to assist them. And they come great distances and they are happy to see me. And I feel like that's at least, and that is probably the most important thing I do. So my work, I think of as just trying to offer something to people that might be in need, who maybe not necessarily what we call the winners of society, people who have struggled and who may be in a bad place for all sorts of reasons. Make sure they have access to equal care as many other people might receive.
That's amazing, honestly. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I grew up in a pretty poor background, nothing like super, super poor, but you know, it was poor. And I remember, you know, the school that I went to was like it was just a state school. It was a good school, but it was just a state school. And I remember sort of when you grow up in that, you don't really, I think about, oh, I'm poor or I'm a poor kid. You don't even think about it. It's just normality. Like I thought we were fine. There was food on the table, you know, there's like, what more do you need? You know? It wasn't until I started going to school and I started seeing, like, for example, I mean, this is luxury, but like wanting to learn to play guitar, for example, and the school had paid lessons, and I asked my mum and she was like, I'm sorry, Chris, we can't afford it. You know, things like that. Or like going to a friend's house and they've got like a really big 4-5 bedroom house, and then I live in this like flat that's falling apart. And that began to kind of like shape my understanding of like, oh, maybe we don't have so much money, which is not a problem. I just saw it as just different, you know. But the reason I'm bringing it up is like you begin to understand what you have access to and the differences between upbringings. Like, and I know this is like a really extreme example, but like I remember there were kids that I went to school with who, you know, would go on like ski trips at some point in the middle of the year, which again, even for my school, I'm still surprised that the school set that up. That seemed like something a private school would do, but whatever. But I remember just looking into it just for fun and telling my mum about it. And it was like, it's like a couple of grand or something insane like that. And I was like, right on. Okay. But yeah, point with this, because I do ramble sometimes, but bringing it back, I just think it's really admirable what you're doing, you know, with regards to trying to create that accessibility. And it makes sense, obviously, because from what you've explained there, you know, you're trying to make it better, because I imagine it was probably a bit harder for yourself, like growing up. And that's actually what I wanted to ask you next was, over the years of you working in dermatology, would you say that accessibility is getting better? I mean, you obviously outlined that there are programs and things in place now, but overall, is it getting better?
Just to go back to that last point you mentioned, I'll answer your question for sure.
Sure.
I had a similar experience to what you just talked about. In high school, I was taking Spanish, you know, and the kids were all going overseas for a trip. And I remember coming home and asking my parents, we were solidly middle class, you know, for the United States, in particular for a Black family, and coming home and asking, I need $2,000 because everyone's going to Spain for you know, they're going to Spain for 10 days. And I remember not necessarily being told no for economic purposes, but understanding it was for economic purposes. My mother telling me that, you know, traveling overseas was not safe, and, you know, you're better off staying here. And I just nodded and said, okay, Mom, and left it at that. But you're right. Sometimes seeing the differences sometimes of what people have and what people don't have. But I just couldn't pass up on that. When you mentioned that story, I thought about it. It's about, I know that story, you know, I know that story. As do a lot of people. And, you know, I don't necessarily think you feel bad about it. I think in a lot of ways, it strengthens you and makes you say, okay, that means if I want to go to Spain, I'm going to make sure I do things that allow me to get to Spain. I'm going to make sure I position myself that I can go and take an opportunity like that. I know that's a whole nother topic, but I really, could resonate with what you said. I
think it's a great topic. I mean, like, I always resonate when I meet other people who grew up kind of poorer, let's say. I always just have fun with it and like just reminisce and just have a laugh about it, because I think it's, as you said, it does give you some sense of I'd say character in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes,
like I've told the stories on the podcast before, so forgive me, but I just find it funny. Like, you know, my mum would sometimes come in and just be like, "Oh, Christian, we've got to tighten our belts this month," and then she's sarcastically be like, "It's going to be beans on toast the whole month," and I was like, like, obviously it's not going to be that bad, but like, it, you know, it meant that, like, okay, maybe we'll just have to maybe eat a little bit less, and, you know, just be a bit careful here and there. And I was always like, yeah, sure, whatever, it's fine, like, you know, because that's all I knew. And I don't know. I mean, I think, you know what, like, with upbringing in general, and also I will say this as well, it's not even about having money or not having money. It's about how your parents raise you. Because I met plenty of kids at school and outside of school who came from rich families, and they were like really well raised, like they had like a good understanding and value of things. I think that's kind of more the key, isn't it? Is like understanding the value of things. Like, for example, I can never throw food away, ever. Like, if I ever have to waste something, a part of my soul just starts dying, because I'm like, no. And maybe it comes from like some old fashioned like wartime mentality that's been passed down for generations. But like, you just never waste food. Like, if you forgive me, I'll tell one quick story and then we'll get back to you, because that's what it's about. But just since we're on the topic, I remember I was at some awful theme park here in the UK that everyone has been to, Thought Park. Anyway, but basically, for anyone that's in the US that's listening to this, imagine that they took this big, massive place, and they dug like a huge hole in the ground, like that goes for ages, and then just filled it with water and created like a little island, right? And then that's what the theme park is on. Very weird. Anyway, I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I went there with my childhood best friend, and I was there. It was me, him, my mother, my auntie, and my uncle. And we were eating lunch or something, and I couldn't finish mine. So I immediately brought it over to my mum or auntie, and I was, you know, like, I didn't even say anything. Like, the way I was raised in that sense was like, share your food. If you've got, you know, food left over, you share it. Like, so I just did that. And then I saw this kid. He goes towards the bin, and my auntie stops him and says, "Whoa, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm finished." And she's like, "Well, you still got food. Like, yeah, aren't you going to offer it to anyone else?" And he was like, no. And then he proceeds to throw it in the bin, and we're all just staring at him like in amazement. Like, we just didn't say anything.
That's crazy.
Okay. But it shows you, like, yeah, different upbringings, different mentalities. It's just how it is. Yeah.
And, you know, you follow up, and it sort of segues to one of the things you asked me earlier about, you know, enjoying my work. And, you know, I mentioned body equality. I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, I was raised in a similar way, not necessarily about food, but food was part of it too. Again, I was from a solidly middle class background in the United States. It was not, you know, over the top, not in the least. You know, literally, I am 2 generations from sharecropping. Sharecropping in the United States is where people essentially work for free for their entire lives farming, and they never get to leave. They live and die on that property. And essentially, it's not quite slavery, but it's not far from slavery. So I'm 2 generations from that. But, you know, family stories, things about value and appreciating the things that you've been given. I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to go to medical school. I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to walk in places. I attended an Ivy League medical school, unheard of in the family I come from. One, to be going to medical school, and number 2, to go to an Ivy League school. I was the first person on either side of my family to do such a thing. I don't say that to toot my horn. I think what I think about it was I was given a very rare opportunity, and I was fortunate enough to be able to understand it and make the best advantage of it that I could. My grandmother, who was raised as a child and as a sharecropper, used to tell me that she would wear shoes twice a year. She would get candy maybe an orange or something like that once a year. And they were raised in a very southern poor environment, and they were sharecroppers. So after I got in, she took all my applications, acceptance letters, and went door to door to door in her whole neighborhood showing those things. And it was, and for that particular neighborhood, that was an unusual thing. And again, I stress, and I'm really honest about this, it's nothing special about me at all. I think it's just coming along at a particular time, a particular change, seeing an opportunity and being able to take advantage of it and sort of go and do something different. You know, being a doctor is okay. It's a great thing. I like it. It's what I like and I enjoy. It's taken me some places to see some things that I probably would never have seen. I've seen all sorts of things that are just really mind-boggling. You think it's just been a great blessing to have had the opportunity to do that. In fact, my daughter's going to be attending the same medical school in a year and a half, so she'll be a second-generation University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine graduate. But you had asked me about things getting better. I think things are getting better in many regards. We are paying attention to perhaps access issues more, and the fact that perhaps our workforce needs to look a little bit like the people that we take care of. And I know I had a doctor ask me one time, you know, he essentially was asking me, does it really matter if I'm different than the people whom I might be taking care of? And I think there's something to be said about having a diversity of groups of people who are providing services that some people deem important. I cannot tell you the numbers of times that I have had people drive, great distances, have people come 2 states away, state away, or something like this, because they are looking for a place where they feel like they can be seen as fully human, fully accepted, fully able to think that the outcome that we both are interested in is the same. Not to be seen as lesser than, not to be seen as a burden, not to be seen as a second-class citizen. And so you asked the question, are things getting better? I think this is a long process. This is a very long process. I had to come to peace with the idea that there's some things I've seen take place while I'm alive that are fantastic. Seeing an African-American man become president 2 terms. I've seen all sorts of things. But I also realize there's some things in my lifetime I'm not going to see. And I have to accept the longer struggle to reach the full opportunity offered by our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. It's not like I'm teaching a history class. I'm not. It's just that I think as a person of color and a person whose family is, was raised or taught to be second-class citizens throughout the generations, it is the utmost in being patriotic to believe that yet again in the future, at some point, the wonderful history of the Constitution and Bill of Rights will apply to us all equally. You fight and you struggle for things that you may never see, rights that you may, as your family, may never have, but you have a faith and a belief that down the road everything is going to be equal. And I still believe that. And so when you ask me, are things getting better? Yes, they're getting better in a lot of ways. Just to even have some of the things that we have is a step in the right direction. We have a distance to go. We have a long way to go. Donald Trump didn't appear out of the ether. He came out of something. And there's always going to be a struggle for assuring the best things that we all feel are great about this country. So if I took that in a direction that you weren't expecting, I apologize in advance, but I want to somehow end up, you're talking about rambling. I can ramble too. I can ramble with the best of them.
Not at all.
Yes, things are getting better. Yes, they are.
Originally, obviously, my question was more about like in the field of, because when you spoke about accessibility for medicines and dermatology and stuff like that was what I was asking about. But
yes,
I love hearing you talk about this, because I think it's a very important point. And I'm going to say it now, like me as a white man, like I don't see this. Like I have plenty of friends that are black and of color and everything, and I never think about it. I know how that sounds, but like they're my friends. Do you see where I'm going with that? It's like,
yes, I understand.
I guess my point is I don't see their struggle and I say I either see it myself or I hear them talk about it, and I listen, and it just breaks my heart. And I'm yeah, you know, I very much kind of get where you're coming from. It's like you see all these amazing changes in society, and it gives you hope and belief, and then, but those changes are different from like what you see in day-to-day life, you know, because I truthfully believe like most people are just like tolerant, decent people. I truly believe that, because there's some people out there that will believe like, oh no, people are horrible. No, I
agree.
I disagree. I think most people just want to kind of get on with their life and be happy, and that's it, you know. And there is no room for like prejudice or racism or whatever. But then the frustrating thing about this is you do see, and I think the bigger problem, and I've spoken about this in other areas, like things like ageism, sexism, nepotism, these kind of things. But like race does come into it. It's just you don't always necessarily see it. Like thankfully we live in a time where things like racism will get called out, and rightly so. But then there's still what I like to call like institutional racism, where there'll be, you know, people kept from positions that they deserve based on their background, and it will never be like made public because obviously they'd be eviscerated. But it's the sort of thing where it's still playing behind the shadows, and we're still trying to fight against that. And it's like this weird kind of ever going battle, really. And you know, I always wonder about like what can I personally do? And you know, best thing I could always do is
you have a platform, and you address these issues, and you basically just shine a light on things that need to be discussed. I think having a honest conversation about a lot of topics is just part of the way that we make a lot of things better. We just say, well, you know, look, this is the history of what has happened. Let's see what we can do to live up to our ideals. Let's live up to all men are created equal. You know, one vote, one man, things like that. So it's a battle and a struggle, and but it's going well. You did ask me specifically about medicine,
right?
And so I will address that for you. I don't want you to think I was ignoring your question, although I took really a great distance. Yes, I do think access is improving in the United States. There were many people who are unhappy about Obama coming up with the healthcare plan that he did, but it has made access much better for many people who needed it. And so you see increasingly people having access to services that they didn't have before, and it is life-saving. Is it perfect? No. Is it too expensive? Absolutely. Is it ever going to be perfect? It's never going to be perfect. It'll never be a time when people have all the healthcare they want at very little cost, and it's the highest quality in the world. That's a hard goal to reach. But have we moved closer to it? Absolutely. Absolutely we have. Certain programs like Medicare have made it excellent for seniors. Certain programs like Medicaid have really helped poor children, and to a great extent. So yes, is access becoming increasingly? I think so. Yes, I do think so. And we're discussing these topics openly in a way that wasn't necessarily done in the past. So I'm pleased with that. Very pleased with that.
As far as like the timeline of events here, so obviously, and I'll just say this from a place of ignorance because I'm from the UK, but the best as I understood was Obamacare was essentially like a base level free form of healthcare in America, which in America obviously is predominantly privatized, isn't it? Like everything private healthcare, right? And
although the more than half the dollars that people spend for healthcare are from the government, when you include what elderly people in Medicare. But you're right, the bulk of what is spent is private. You're correct.
Yeah, I just try to get my head around it sometimes as far as the model and everything. Because here in the UK, obviously we have the NHS, which is a free healthcare service, but there are many parts to it which are now fully privatized, and there's always this fear and worry that we'll become exactly like America, and it's a danger, because I think that where like we have opposite of problem, if you sort of say, like you guys want to get like a free baseline level of healthcare, and we kind of want to keep that free baseline, but there are some elements, like I believe You can get dental care here for free, but generally it's the sort of thing where you're better off going private because you'll just be waiting forever. Like it kind of works like that in certain instances. Anyway, if I remember correctly, with the way it sort of works in America, is you had Obamacare, that base level thing, and then all the other things that you've outlined there, like Medicare, etc. And then, and that was met with varying degrees of opinions, some negative, some positive, depending on where you are in the country and etc. But then, as I understood, when Trump came in, he either eradicated it or overturned it or something like that. And then, has it been reinstated since, or like where are we at now with regards to that?
During the Trump years, they made many attempts to undermine Obamacare, to make it such that many of these things no longer exist, but they were not successful. There were some minor things that were done in an effort to undermine it, full attempts to do it. I don't know what it's like in the UK. In the United States, somehow the access to healthcare has fallen into the category of political leanings, and there are, based upon your politics, you may not necessarily want everyone to have access to healthcare in a way that's similar to what you have. You've got many competing models. You've got private institutions that would rather keep it the way it is. You've got private insurance companies that would rather keep it the way it is. They make a significant amount of money, massive amounts of money, by basically being the middleman for health between the patient and the provider or the institution. And so you have a lot of competing issues, and with Obamacare, like you said, and some of the other things, even my understanding is that even when they were working on Medicare, which was to try to help elderly people, there were still these issues that there's an element of our society that sees giving people better access to healthcare as being undermining their political opinions and undermining their freedoms in a way that I don't understand. There are all sorts of elements in various societies, but yes, many attempts have been made to undermine it, but it remains. It still remains. So we have these exchanges where you try to get healthcare on the basis of larger numbers of people pooling together and accessing it, and then you have money that's dispensed to various government-based places like community health centers where people can go and they can just go in there and get care very inexpensively. It's a lot of competing issues. There's a lot of moving parts. It's 1/7 of our economy. So it's not surprising that it has a lot of different competing elements. In general, people can have healthcare here. The thing that limits many people is not necessarily access. If I'm a person who has no money and I go and I saw this happen with someone I knew who was in our church. It's a woman who came from another country. She has no health insurance. She goes to the local hospital institution. She has a mass in her chest, and it's a very large mass, and it's not clear what it is. She was able to have the services. No one's going to deny her having surgery, particularly for something that's life-threatening. Now, the flip side of that is there's a massive bill that may come with that, and it may be a bill that you can never overcome. One of the leading reasons for bankruptcies in the United States if not the leading reason, is health-related issues, that people go and they don't have enough insurance and they have some services performed and then they owe a lot of money. That is a issue that I would love to see addressed. But in terms of whether you can have the services like they have, I just saw some ad for some movie, and these two guys are in an ambulance and they stole some money and they're driving around the street shooting at the police. And one of the two guys says to the other guy, my daughter needed this surgery, or my wife needs this surgery, and so I was willing to go and rob the bank to get a surgery. Well, the fact of the matter is she could have had the surgery either way. Now, how long it would take you to pay for it? It would be a long time if you don't have any health care. So it's a false narrative that you don't have access. It's an issue more of the economics that come with it. You may get this massive bill. Now, that in and of itself is a problem. But if you're ill and you need some services, you can have them. No, not everyone wants to take on that bill, and I do understand that. That is a hard thing to have, the finances of it.
That's the
So,
tricky part. Like whenever I've spoken to Americans or heard the stories, it always kind of sounds like a decision sometimes. So like, okay, um, do I get this surgery that I need, or do I not go into debt and take the risk? That's often how it sounds like it's laid out. And it's just like crazy to think about when you're thinking about your own life, that you have to think about things in those terms. But as you say, it's like a bill that will just sit over you, that you can never really shake unless you, I don't know, get lucky with insurance or whatever the case may be. And then of course it obviously also then depends on the level of surgery you need. Like some things are more minute, might cost less. Some things cost a lot more.
yes.
I mean, yeah, it's just it's
It's very
crazy.
complicated. It's very complicated. When you hear anyone give a simple answer for it, they have not really thought it through, or they're
Yeah.
not prepared to deal with all the moving parts to it.
Mm.
And in no way do I think we have the best healthcare system on earth as the way it is. It's the one we have. We should keep trying to improve it. And I think that's true for just about anyone around the world.
Let's bring it back to your dermatology for a little bit. What have been your kind of most challenging cases? Obviously, we highlighted some of the best sort of scenarios and what you look for and stuff like that. But what have been the kind of the tougher ones where you had to kind of draw on, I don't know, other elements of yourself to kind of get through it and such? Like what have been the most challenging ones?
Sure. So you bring up an interesting point, because that's a complicated question, because there are some very medically focused things I could talk about. I can talk about people that walk in who have skin cancer and it's spread to other parts of their body already. That is, one of the more challenging things, watching people who are going to die sooner than you might expect, and to try to help them as best you can. Not necessarily helping them to live longer, although that's the goal, but perhaps make it so they're comfortable. Perhaps make it so that they may have something growing and it's really big and unattractive. You can remove it and they can still have a reasonable quality of life. Dealing with children oftentimes can be a challenge and can be very heartbreaking. If you're a child, you're at the mercy of how well your parents are willing to take care of you. So if you have very competent parents who can remember how to give you the medicine and how to make sure you get to your appointments, and that works out great. So you have children that come in with things that are readily treatable that don't get better because they have chaotic families or chaotic home lives. And that can be heartbreaking to watch something like that. People have struggles with all sorts of issues with substance abuse, or maybe just a safe place to live, things like that. But if you were to say strictly from a medical standpoint, I talked about skin cancer that can spread. There have been a number of patients I've had who have unusual types of skin cancer that are often not necessarily picked up easily. And I remember an 18-year-old young man that came to see me one time who was on his way to college, and he had this lump growing on the back of his head. It was about the size of maybe an eraser on a pencil. And it had been back there, and he came in, and this is a strong young man, he a wrestler, headed off to college. And he came in to see me, and it looked innocent enough, and I took a biopsy of it and sent them home. And once I got the results back, it was a stage 4 melanoma, which is a very deadly type of cancer. And I remember calling his parents and having them come in and for me to talk to them. Just that waiting that you have sometimes when you have to talk to people about things that are very important to them, it's a hard thing to deal with. Having a conversation with someone and telling them that they have what potentially will be a life-ending event has a great deal of sadness for the patient, difficulty for the patient, but there's a burden that comes with that from the standpoint that you really want more for people. You want something better. I was having a conversation with my daughter who was going into medicine. I was telling her about there's a certain burden that comes as a physician sometimes, having to talk to people about things and to be the kind of person that you need to present yourself at a moment that's a really sad moment. I had to do that when I was in pediatrics. I've done it in dermatology. You say tougher cases. These are people whose lives are going to be changed forever. Maybe, this young man, he ended up going to another institution and getting all sorts of chemotherapy. And I pray that he survived. It would not surprise me if he did not. He had a stage 4 cancer at 18. He had been on some medications earlier in his life that probably made it a little more likely he was going to get it. But what kind of life does he have now? He's headed off to college. He's not someone that maybe he doesn't get to get married. Maybe he doesn't get to bring the grandkids over. And the pain and the anguish that goes along with that when you talk to people can be great. And it really is something, if you're a reasonably caring person at all, you see the burden that it puts on people. You see them looking at you, hoping that you're going to say something that makes them feel better, that gives them some hope. And learning how to deliver things like that, learning how to have that conversation, to be compassionate with people, to be honest with people, to offer them hope even when at the time it may not look like much hope. When you talk about difficult cases, that's difficult for one type of reason. Those are probably my biggest challenges. In terms of dealing with this. There's been all sorts of unusual things. I saw someone walk in one time with what looked like a golf ball growing off the top of their head. That was a melanoma. This person had this thing literally looked like a golf ball. I saw someone that looked like, talking about sports analogies, a guy that had what looked like the equivalent of a football growing out of the back of his head. It's a chronic scarring condition that had scarred to the point that it was just really massive, and it's very smelly and difficult, and it affected his quality of life tremendously. I've seen people come in with little spots on their hands and feet that seem like innocent moles, but later on you biopsy and they turn out to be types of skin cancers. Or people that scratch themselves excessively to the point of just bleeding. You walk in, there's blood on their clothing and things because they're just so itchy and so uncomfortable. Those are, many of the challenging things. Thank goodness, the level of care we can offer for a lot of these things are a lot better than it used to be. So it's a lot of encouragement to offer people, but yeah, those I consider some of the more challenging cases for obviously a number of reasons, not just medically, but for the patient and for sometimes as the provider trying to assist people.
Thank you so much for sharing. One question I'd be remiss not to ask you about that is, did you sort of ever, I presume you would have got some sort of training professionally in order to deal with those situations as best you could, but like, how did you develop that ability to show the right amount of empathy and compassion, but also keep it strictly professional and not like your emotions affected? Because we're human at the end of the day. Like, you still can't ever stop being human despite being a physician. So like, how did you learn to do that?
It's a great question, because it's something, as I said, I've addressed with my daughter who's considering medicine. You do not get a formal education about how to approach these situations. I remember the first time I had to call a parent and tell them, when I was practicing pediatrics and I was in the hospital, call a parent in the middle of the night to tell them their child had died. I remember someone pulled me aside and gave me about 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes of a conversation. They said, you're going to call, you're going to be very calm. You're going to say to them that the child has died, and you're going to allow them to have the time to speak and you encourage them a little bit. I want you to go in and do that. And the person walked away. I was probably a doctor all of 3 months at that point. And I can remember so clearly speaking to this mother at 3 a.m. in Chicago, and she just burst into tears. The child was already sick, but people know that the child, that the patient might be sick, but they don't always know the depth of it. You may tell them, but their minds don't allow them to embrace it. And to listen to her cry and cry for a long time, and then to try to find a way to allow her the person to go on and have some moments where they can gather themselves, or maybe call someone. I was not given any formal way of learning how to do that. I think it's incredibly necessary. I think learning how to also do the other things. When you deliver information, how do you look? I mean, it seems like it's a small issue that people would only want the information, but how you deliver it can be really challenging. My father died about 3 years ago from prostate cancer. And I remember he didn't let me know till the very end. Literally, I only knew 6 days before he died. But I remember his ex-wife telling me that when he was told that he had cancer, that the doctor was very flippant and appeared not to care. He says, well, you got 6 months, do the best you can. And, you're not going to make it beyond 6 months. And that how devastated they were about getting the information in the way that they got it. The way that people get it has a lot to do with sometimes how well they can at least start to deal with it. If it's done in a way that seems flippant, or you're not concerned, you don't have good body language, it can really throw people off. They're watching a lot of the things that you do. And it is something that you practice and you try to get better at. And, you say as a dermatologist, what's the chances of that happening? It's very rare. It's relatively rare. I remember a case, of example, this is just being a doctor in general. I was waiting in the office and someone ran into our exam room and said, there's a lady out in front of who's coming to see you, and she just fell down outside. I think she's having trouble. So I ran out the building, and there's a woman sitting on the ground. And I walked over to her and spoke to her and said, she says, I don't know what's going on. I said, just lay back. I had her lie back. And then her heart stopped. So we had to do the full resuscitation, which included mouth to mouth. I'm out in a public place. There are people gathering around while me and the nurse are working. And we go and the long and short of it is the person died. And we had to notify the family. And I remember about 2 weeks later, someone walked into my office and handed me a program from a funeral. And it was the lady. And the person said to me, and really I just choke up just thinking about it. And the person said to me, I'm glad you were there for her and she didn't die alone. And it just struck me in such a way that it was just incredibly important, that it was great that, part of it is not just trying to save the person's life, but to be seen as an agent and at least trying to help people with their own comfort and their own normal life circumstances. We're all going to die. We're all going to get sick. But there are ways of trying to help people embrace some of the things that you do. And you ask a question where, no, it wasn't. I wish we had. There were times things would happen and people would die, and you would occasionally get a talk from the more senior doctors, and they would share some of the scenarios they had been under. But there was nothing like a formula or a way. It's just a sort of a burden that you have to sort of work your way through with time and maybe watching other people do it. It's something. Not everyone is as good at it as others. I'm not saying I'm great at it. I'm not. It's just it's something you have to learn. Yes, it's a great point.
Thank you, sir, for sharing that. I really appreciate that. My next question was going to be like, what steps do you take to take care of yourself? This is a very kind of challenging role, in an emotional role. It's demanding on you from every single perspective. I'm very aware of how many hours physicians and doctors work as well, so there's that element to it too, but it's just all encompassing. So like, what do you do to take care of yourself and just take care of yourself, mind, body, and soul, so that you can keep going and keep doing this and keep helping people?
Yeah, I've really developed a lot of new interest and coping things to do over the years. I think, I can speak only for myself. Other people find other things, but I love sports. I watch a lot of basketball and football and what we call football, and college and pro. And it's a distraction that is just fantastic. And I'm in an area where it's very popular for college and very popular for pros. I like to exercise. I have run half marathons. I run some. I like to lift weights. I'll swim in the summer. I try to find a range of things to do that really get my heart rate up, and a lot of things that just really push me to my edge, which I really like. I run these little, I call myself running, really a slow jogging, but I run these little occasional races they'll have with 5K and half marathon and things. And there are moments during it where you really are at your edge, where you can feel the pain. You may be down on yourself. You know, you've got another 5 miles to go. And there's just something about it I find very rewarding that sort of simplifies things, that focuses you, that there's a reward that comes from that dopamine surge, that sense of completion. I love those things. And I find it makes it it helps me cope with life in general. And I really like that. I like to, I've been learning to play golf. I've been playing golf with my friends more lately. It's a very social sport. I really, really like it. I never thought I would be a golfer. I remember the closest thing I thought golf was like watching the grass grow. So the dullest thing you could possibly do. But I have come to do that. I have a wonderful wife and family. I have a wife that's also a physician. So I have the benefit of being able to come at home. And there are times I come home and we share things about things we experienced that day. And that has been, you know, beyond, I can't even put words about how fortunate it is. I have a tremendous friend network. It's tremendous to me. These are great people and we have a lot of fun. We go out, we celebrate each other's birthdays. We go to occasional, you know, gatherings together. I invite people over, do some things. I just think it's great. And I like to read. I spend more time reading, and I try to spend more time in nature. That's one of the things I've enjoyed most. There's been a lot of conversations lately about the impact of doing the kind of jobs that we do. And again, I want to preface it. I'm not saying that our jobs are any harder or easier than anyone else's. I think it's a different kind of job. And whether you're practicing medicine or whether you're working in a high-tech company and trying to bring out a product, there's a certain burden that comes with the kind of choices that you make.
Sure.
So yeah, I like to spend time out in nature. I try to do a few things around the house. I like to cook. I've become a reasonable cook. My family thinks I'm a pretty good cook. I like to cook things. So I cook just about every day. I love trying new things. I'll go to the farmer's market and buy all sorts of vegetables I've not tried before and things. And I'll come home and whip up some recipes, usually something I find online. And just the creativity that goes with that, you know, you get a great meal at the end. Hopefully it's great. Not always. I love that. I grow a few vegetables in the yard, which I use for the cooking. I like that. So those are the things I've tried to do over the years. I've found them very rewarding. They really enrich my life. And then the times I have with my friends where we can just talk about, you know, literally anything. I have some tremendous friends. So I'm very fortunate.
Thank you so much for sharing. I just know that there'll be people listening to this that are either, you know, aspiring physicians or whatnot. And I think it's important to know that, you know, it's good to have like a variety within your life to you know, outside of what you do. Like, it's the same with me. Like, I spend a lot of my time working and doing things I'm passionate about, things I'm not so passionate about. But I do think it's important to have that time for yourself and have lots of interests and be around people and stuff like that, especially, you know, in your field. I mean, I know you say like, oh, maybe it's not as difficult as, you were saying that you think like other industries, probably it's challenging too, but like, I don't know, like the only thing I could even compare it to, which I don't even think is really comparable, is working in customer services. That's what I did when I was younger. And that was only really demanding because of the way people would speak to you. And, you know, the nature of the work being, you know, like having a lot of hours. But I don't think it's really comparable to what you do, because the difference is like, my stories from years ago of like bad customers, that used to be a source of like frustration and anger and everything for me. But now it's just like funny. It's like, oh, haha, that was then. And it doesn't really affect me. Whereas with everything that you do, it's like, this is something you're really passionate about. It's a part of you. It's I think any kind of job, I think, where you're taking care of other people in some shape or form,
yes,
is going to be different to just like customer service or, I don't know, marketing, business, whatever. Like, and there will be difficult elements to all those jobs. And sometimes like just a bad coworker or a horrible customer or something can really make your life a nightmare. And I've been on the receiving end of that, so I do not by any means minimizing that, but I do think, I mean, if you look at everything that was happening in COVID-19 and how people were really appreciative of and not just like medical workers, but frontline workers and stuff. And I think it comes down to the fact that not only were you risking your lives in general, but also, I think finally it really shined a light on just everything that physicians do for us and what that entails. Because I always look at it like it's everything. It's not just long hours, it's the emotional side, it's the physical side, it's all of those things. And it takes a lot. It takes its toll on you. I can recognize, I see that in people I know that are physicians or in those care industries and stuff, and it does take its toll on them, and it's tough to keep going. That's why I asked you about what you do in your free time. Like, what do you do to keep yourself going, keep yourself happy? Because that's so important, I think, in regards to that.
I think you hit it right on the head with all people. And I say you're right. There are some differences because of the kind of work that I do and many people do. I try to be very careful about when talking to people about not.
Right.
There's been this sort of elevation of doctors as being these kind of people. You see them, they have all these TV shows about them and everything, and there's some truth to some of them, some of them in a limited way. And so, I think it's a great profession, and I think it's a great calling, and I like what I do. But you are right. I think if you look at their statistics of suicide rates are higher among people that are doing the kind of work that we do. I think, you have many great benefits that come with it, though. I mean, there's a certain way that people treat you in a way that is a little bit different than maybe some other professions, which, is usually to your advantage, usually. But you're right. I think people need to all have some kind of outcome some kind of outlet, and learning how to embrace that and consider it normal and consider it a part of making your work life better has been a transition. I listen to what you're saying. You talk about that, work a lot of long hours. I have a psychologist I go see at times, and she retired recently, but I remember her saying to me, giving me an analogy about someone walking up on someone who was cutting wood in the forest, and he kept cutting wood, and someone said, "Do you ever stop to sharpen the axe?" Basically saying, do you ever stop to allow yourself to recover so that the work that you're doing is better? And it has taken me a long time to figure out how to do that and to embrace it and to see it as necessary and normal. There used to be a sort of a guilt I had about taking time off and doing things that when I could have been doing something more for learning, or maybe doing something for my family. I have a family, I have 3 kids and a wife. They're all grown now, but there was a time when I found that very challenging. And so you just learn to balance it. I think all of us nowadays, particularly with people that work from home, the idea of having some kind of break for yourself. I had a friend that really pushed me about that over years, and it's only worked out to my advantage. And so I've been very, very pleased that I've found these other things. I love all these things. In fact, today after work, I'm going to play some golf with my friends. There's time I never would have done that in the middle of the week. I'm doing it in the middle of the week this week, and it'll be for 2-3 hours, and it'll be very peaceful. And I'll come home, and I'm better for having done that. I'll be better tomorrow at work because of what I do this afternoon. So yes, it is part of the game, and I think people have to learn. There are people who are not very good at it and who push themselves to the edge. I mean, you literally can do study and look at the patient charts and everything, 24 hours a day. But it's trying to find some balance, and I think that's going to be true for all of us, for everyone.
Thank you for sharing. Just a final few questions, just to kind of get some advice for you. I always like to ask my guests for advice. Let's keep it with dermatology for the second, though. What advice could you give to aspiring dermatologists?
Yes, I think it's important to make sure that you realize it's a long road. And I say this for not just for dermatology, but people in general, is that you have to be prepared for what's going to be a very long process relative to, say, your friends. I remember finishing college, and I went off to medical school, and I'm taking loans and I'm studying, and there are people out on vacation and they're driving fancy cars around, and I'm sitting here, studying. And there's some moments I was like, this is too much. I don't feel like doing it. But later on, it has its benefits. So you have to be willing to go the longer road. The second thing is that you have to feel like your visual senses are some of your stronger senses. There's some people who are very good at, they have excellent ears for music and they can listen and play things. That will not benefit you in dermatology, but you have to have the ability to really look at things and notice very subtle things, and to have a good memory for pictures and for things that you see. Thirdly, you have to be prepared to give up your time in ways that are different than other people. So for instance, doesn't happen a lot in dermatology, but as I was training, you might get a call in the middle of the night that says, I need you to come into the ER and see this patient. It might be 2 a.m. You get up and you do it. You try not to do it too much, but if you have to, you do, and you are willing to give up your time. And another thing that I would probably include in that, and this is for people in general, is that people come to see you and they invest a lot of their effort into that. Someone that shows up in your office or comes to see you has maybe found a babysitter, maybe used some of their sick time or their annual time to do it, maybe have driven great distances, maybe have given you money that seems like a lot of money to them. They might give you $25 to be there. That can be a lot of money to them. And that when they're there, they're expecting a person who is concerned about them. They're expecting people who are professionally trained. They're expecting people who enjoy making sure that tie their happiness in that moment, or at least their good outcome in that moment, to what you're given. So you have to be prepared to deliver on some of those things. So that's what I'd probably recommend for people going into dermatology or medicine in general.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
Good question. Someone asked me that about 3 weeks ago. I think I'm going to have to give you more than one. So I'm going to give you a couple things. Number one is my mother, at a very young age, when I told her I wanted to be a physician, she said to me, remember, this is a long road and you have to pace yourself. She knew that I could be very intense. She knew that I liked many of the fields that you have to study to go into medicine. And she wanted to remind me that it can be a lot and it can be overwhelming, and that you have to be prepared to think of it as a very long road to go. Another piece of advice I got from someone, and I'm having a hard time remembering who told me this, but it sounds probably cliche, but it is really true. To treat the patients and treat people around you as if you were treating your relatives. So when someone comes to see me, I try to imagine them as being someone who's related to me. I try to treat them in a way that I would for someone I would be invested in. When I have an elderly person, I think it reminds me of my grandmother, who I love dearly. And I try to imagine, what would I like her to have in this particular circumstance? How would I like someone to speak to her? How would I like to have someone address her? So I think about that. I see a lot of children. I've had children. I try to imagine, what do I do for my own children? So that sort of teaching, I think, has really served me well. I start off trying to do those things. I don't always succeed. I don't always give people exactly what they're looking for. In fact, sometimes I'm not able to give them what they're looking for. But I think I at least try to embrace that and to give that to people. And that's something that I think was a great piece of advice. And the third one, and I'll make it short because I know you're busy, but the third one was that someone taught me that everyone has something to teach you. I'm very fortunate. I've been in school for a long time. 12 years of high school, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency in dermatology, and another 3 years of time training in dermatology, as well as pediatrics. And so it was a long road. And to realize that regardless of what I may know, everyone has had back things that they can teach you, regardless of whether a child or an older person or someone that doesn't have as much education. All have things that you can learn from them. They all have some piece of some puzzle that could be valuable to you. So you respect and honor people regardless of whatever circumstances they find themselves to be in. I think those are 3 pieces of advice I think are some of the best.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really, really appreciate it. I ask every guest this question. It's similar to the one I asked you before, but it's more kind of focused on your life so far and everything you've done. What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
Again, I would love to give you one, but do you mind if I give you 2 or 3? I'll give you 2 or 3.
Absolutely.
One is that life is very short, and that in a blink of an eye, things change. And you don't, I remember being a much younger man and thinking that I knew exactly how my life was going to unfold. I'm going to live to be this certain age. I'm going to live here and do this and do that. And so much of it is different than what I expected. There are people who left far too early from my life in ways that I just did not see. I am 61, and I feel very much like I'm about 25 in my mind, but it has been. And definitely, no one looks at me and says, "Oh, you look 25," because I don't. I look like I'm 61. But that time, your life can pass very quickly. There are some things you need to enjoy your life along the way, and enjoy your friends and family at the time that they're there. I think I took for granted sometimes that these people are always going to be there, be it my parents or my grandparents or some of my professors, some of my good friends who, what I wouldn't do to have another moment with these people. So the idea that you realize that time passes very fast, you appreciate the time that you have, treat people in that circumstance like this might be the last time you see them, because it really might be, in ways I just never thought about. Another great piece of life, information advice that I've learned is that I think people try to do the best they can. There are times at which I'll look at some crazy scenario. We were joking before we came on about Will Smith and Chris Rock and all sorts of things. And I look at that scenario or any challenging scenario I've seen and think, wow, why would someone do something like that? Why would people behave in this manner? And a professor of mine said, he was a professor of mine, an art history professor, said, if people could do better, then they would. Sometimes this is the best someone has. That you don't know their background, you don't know what they've gone through, you have no clue. It may be difficult for you, and maybe you need to separate yourself from person's being unrealistic, but there are people who are living lives and going through all sorts of things that you just don't understand. And it doesn't mean you have to put up with abuse. It doesn't mean you've got to think what they're thinking is right, but you realize that people are, from their perspective, they really do believe that they're right about the things that they're doing. And most people are not choosing to purposely do things wrong or to purposely be difficult. In their world, in their perspective, it is the thing that they believe. So those are 2 particularly different things. And the third thing is learning how to enjoy yourself and be present in the moment that you are. Oftentimes when I was very young, I was 21, 22, thinking about the future. Oh, one day when I finish in Madison, I'm going to go on this great vacation. I'm going to have this wonderful wife and these children. Meanwhile, I'm 20. I'm hanging out and having a good time, and I'm focused on these other things when at the moment I should appreciate and enjoy that moment. I have I have a daughter who's still in college, and I try to tell her. She has some struggles, and I said, you pay attention to where you are at this moment, because you will look back. These are your good old days. These are the moments that you will look back upon with great fondness, and you can't appreciate it now. But do all the fun things. Enjoy yourself now. Enjoy your friends. Stay in the moment, not the future, not what's coming next. Those things may never come to pass, but try to be where you are now and think where you are now is a great place, because it is a great place. Later on, you'll look back and wish you had that again. And it's hard to see it at 20 and 21 and 22. We're all very young and strong, and I was telling you, your hair looks as good as it's ever going to get. You have no lines on your face. Everything's great. You're just rolling. You look back at your old pictures and you say, man, I was really the man back in those days. But at the time, if you ask yourself, say, I'm not the man. I need to, be better. I need to be taller. I need to finally catch up with that girl. But you were more than enough at the time. So learn to appreciate at the moment. You are great where you are, and enjoy the things you have while you have them, because they will change. So those are the three of the things that I think I've learned over the years.
Thank you so much for sharing. Honestly, it's always a pleasure when I get to ask these questions to people from around the world and learn about different just life stories and experience and everything, you know. And I really resonate with some of the things you said just throughout this whole conversation, particularly about, you know, like everyone having something to offer, and, you know, just in general, I think that we do take a lot of things for granted, and we don't always realize what we have. You know, I think it's important to try to do that. I'm definitely trying to do that now. Like with what you were saying there, like being in the moment, I really try and do that. Like take this podcast as an example. I mean, when I'm doing it, when I'm here, I'm in this moment, I'm in this conversation, and that's all I'm thinking about. Yeah, my mind is like, oh, I've got to stop this at some point, and I've got to move to this topic, and you know, but that's background stuff. Like the main core of what I'm in this for and what I'm doing is I want to have a great conversation with this person and really showcase this human being, you know, in every sense, you know, because I think, and I started to think about this a lot more recently with what am I trying to achieve with this podcast? I've said this in more recent episodes as well, but I guess what I'm trying to achieve with it is to showcase the amazing stories of different people from around the world, different backgrounds. And, you know, I think it's certainly my personal experience is I gain so much from it. I just learn from every single person, and it's an absolute pleasure and an honor. And I also think that hopefully anyone listening to this or watching this will gain something from this, will, you know, resonate with some of the things that have been discussed, and we'll learn something and realize that, you know, life is all about these experiences and these lessons that we continue to learn. And, you know, as you put it, you know, most of the time we're just trying to do our absolute best. And it's okay if sometimes your best is not as good as the day before. You know what? As long as you did your best on that particular day and you put your heart and soul into what you did, then that's all you can ever ask for. So there you go.
I would like to say in follow-up, you know, I've done a couple of these things. I will have to admit that you have asked questions and really hit on some topics that I just normally don't talk about. I found it to be a very, you know, it's a very positive experience. And the way you just said, you know, showcasing this person, that's a really cool way of thinking about it. You know, that you are helping to see more than just say the topic. You know, like I said, I'm a dermatologist. We talked about that. We talked about a whole lot of other things too. And I think, yeah, you know, this has been as good as any I've done. And I really, you know, I found it very pleasant. It was a great experience. You know, I'd be more than happy to talk to you again at some point if you ever wanted it. It was just really good.
It would be
you can edit that part out if you want, but I really liked it.
No. I mean, I make a point of never ever editing things. A, because I'm too lazy, and B, because I like to have a real conversation. I like it to feel that, you know, if you were sitting and listening to this, it's as though you're in the room and you're listening to two people having a conversation. And maybe it's like, you know, like if you're at a bar or something and you sit there and you hear a good conversation, you're like, yeah, and it just inspires you or gives you something, you know. Like I can't count how many times I've walked away, and today no exception, having learned something. And I don't know, I guess it gives me like some faith in humanity. As you said, yeah, you talk about the specifics, you know, obviously we're here to talk about you and the things that you offer and stuff, and hopefully people will go and check those things out. But I think that the bigger thing that you gain from it is that you realize, you know, there's a human being behind every, you know, like, jumbling my words a bit here. I'll sum it up a better way. What I tend to do now, whenever I meet new people, like in real life, if I meet someone, instead of asking them what they do for a living, I ask them what they're passionate about. And
I like that.
It elicits a better response, you know, because I think your passions are the things that ignite your soul, and that's what you are as a human being, you know.
Yes.
And your work can be that, but sometimes it's not always that. Sometimes a job is just a job, and hey, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, you got to do what you got to do to make a living in this world, and respect to everyone. You know, I've had times in my life where I've been unemployed, and that really made me understand the value of having a job. And you know, like, it totally changed my whole perspective on everything. And as we said at the beginning of this conversation, you know, understanding the value of things, value of people, experiences, time, everything. Okay, here's something as well, just a final thing. I don't want to ramble too much, but one thing I found myself doing a lot more, and maybe this is just an age thing, I don't know, but I find myself crying a lot more. I remember when I was growing up, I didn't really cry ever, and I used to wonder if there was something wrong with me. But then now I find myself getting emotional, like you see something someone says, or you see a beautiful moment, or a film, or a song, or just something that resonates and hits you on a level. And I think that when you start appreciating everything you have had, and everything that's coming, that's when I think you begin to really appreciate all that life has to offer. And it's hard, don't get me wrong. I know it's an attitude thing. I know it's difficult. I've been on both sides, but yeah, life has a lot to offer. And
I think you said it really well, talking about the issue of crying. And we're fully human, and we have a full range of emotions. And I was raised by a very relatively stoic father, and I saw him cry more at the end of his life. Once you can finally become the person that I kind of think the current person is the best version of yourself, and you're adding more to that as time goes on, hopefully for the better. And crying, it's nothing wrong with crying. It's nothing wrong with feeling those feelings, missing people, being sad, being happy, you know, the whole range. You know, as men particularly, sometimes we feel like we're limited to anger, and anger is our way of expressing how tough we are in these kinds of things. But there's so much more, and there is so much more in there, and you should be able to show it all. I completely agree with that.
As we draw things to a close for today, do you have any upcoming projects, or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Sure. So I will shamelessly plug my new product line, Dr Clearskin. It's geared primarily for shaving related things. That's a little project I've been working on in terms of trying to fill a niche for people who have shaving difficulties. These are things that you add to your shaving routine to try to make things better. That's both for women and for men. Other projects, I'm expanding some things here in my office, trying some new ventures. I had mentioned primarily about taking care of mostly medical things. Now we're working a bit more on cosmetic things. I'm looking forward to traveling again. I had a trip planned to Greece before the pandemic. I would love to get back to Austria. I love the UK. I really had a great time in London. Absolutely love London. I'd like to. There's a patient of mine who's from the Isle of Wight, if I said that correctly.
Isle of Wight.
Isle of Wight. Okay, so I said it wrong. So he told me about it, showed me some pictures, and I've just been obsessed with it since then. And I have to go to that place. That is on my list. Hopefully to get there in the next year or two. Travel someplace in the United States, go see some friends. I've been on this venture now of going back and visiting some of my friends I haven't seen in a long time. I consider them dear friends, and we're all so busy. I decided I'm going to be the one. Someone says, be the best example of a friend that you would want to have. So I'm going to visit my friends, and I'm just saying, I appreciate you. I missed you. And so I've been driving around doing that a lot more, and it has been to no end just so valuable. So more of that, enjoying life, having a glass of wine here and there, cooking, watching my sports, doing those things. I'm having the time of my life. I really am. And, I have a lot to be grateful for. And as I said again, I really enjoyed, this was great. This was fantastic. I could do this, every month. This is just great. You really brought out a lot of conversation, a lot of things that were really insightful questions. I've been asked a number of questions. I have a couple of interviews I did in the last couple of months, but nothing quite like this. This was really, really penetrating and insightful and good. I really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And to all my listeners of the Christian Reeve Podcast, as always, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.